Well, I haven't done a video in a while, and I figured it was time to pick up the camera and get back at it. Finally feel a little bit recovered from having my baby. I delivered a little baby boy back in July. He's actually baby number 6, and everything went great. He is happy and healthy and joyful, and it was an uncomplicated delivery, but it takes you a little bit to get back on your feet. At least it takes me a little while to get back into the routine of life and feel energetic and motivated again to get projects done. So today I wanted to start on one of my favorite projects, which is the garden, and I have several different flats of fall plants that I need to get into the soil so I can grow cabbage and broccoli for the winter. But right now the garden is covered up in plastic. This is landscape fabric just because that's what I had on hand, but you can use a tarp if that's what you have. But over the summer, because of the pregnancy and delivery, the weeds really took over the garden. It got extremely weedy. I wasn't able to get as much of a harvest as I had hoped for. And it was just so overgrown that it was kind of overwhelming to look at and deal with. So in an effort to reset the garden, I asked my husband to basically mow everything down. He took the lawnmower and just cut down all the plants and all the weeds down to the ground, and we covered it with this landscape fabric to act as a tarp. So tarping is a way to reset your garden without having to till. It does take a little bit of time, but tarping blocks the sunlight and essentially creates an environment where any weeds, plants, or seeds underneath cannot grow or germinate. Well, actually the seeds under there will germinate, but because they have no sunlight, they'll quickly die off, and it actually reduces what they call the weed seed bank. It reduces the amount of weed seeds that you have in your soil. And so by killing everything off, I can start with a nice blank slate and get some new plants in the ground. So this is actually a row of peppers that I had growing along this trellis here. Originally tomatoes were here, but I pulled the tomatoes out. I left the peppers because they were still doing some growing and had some peppers left on them, but we've already had our first frost and they're dying back. So I'm just gonna pull all of these peppers out. Technically, I'm just gonna cut them at the base. But we're gonna redo this row, and then I'm gonna pull back this first sheet of plastic and get 1 or 2 rows exposed, and then we're going to mulch them and plant some plants here. So this is what I have. I actually have 2 flats of cabbage, and these are some little broccoli plants that I got at a local nursery. They were these tiny little plugs, and they looked really sickly when I bought them. So I put them in pots and they're starting to grow. So we're gonna get those in the ground, and I have some little lettuces here as well. Isaac's out here driving his 4-wheeler right over my garden. Isaac, get off the garden, please. He's a stinker. All right, first things first, get all of these pepper plants out, weed this bed, and get it prepped for planting. So when cutting all these peppers down, I actually realized that there's way more good edible peppers on here than I realized. Like here's a nice shishito. So I'm actually, look at this bell pepper. I guess I should have paid closer attention to my pepper plants before I cut them down. So we're gonna get one last harvest and then take all the rest of these plants to the chickens. All right, not a bad little last pepper harvest for peppers I didn't even realize I had growing. Chickies. Hopefully they'll enjoy that little snack. Okay, so I just took my hula hoe, or stirrup hoe as other people call it, which is this bad boy right here. It's a hoe that has a sharpened, it's not very sharp, but kind of a sharpened edge on the blade, and you can use that to run up under the top surface of your soil, and it will actually cut weeds off at the base. So it leaves the weed roots intact, but it cuts the leaves off so that the roots will stay in the soil and they'll continue to decompose and add organic matter to the soil. And then since the leaves are gone, it can't continue to grow because it doesn't have an energy source to have photosynthesis occur. So I did that to try to get rid of all the weeds. Any of the leaves and things that were growing on top, I just left in place. I'll show you. So I just went through and I cut all the weeds at the soil level. So like these are some weeds where I just left the tops here on the soil, but if you move it back, you can see they're not actually growing in the soil. But these are, that's actually a part of a pepper plant there. These are nitrogen sources, and so if I just leave them on the soil and cover them up with some mulch, these will continue to decompose and just add nutrients back into the soil. So I did that for this whole row here. So what we have now is, since we've hula hoed all the weeds out, I've gone and put a nice thick layer of straw on top of it as a mulch layer. And I still need to smooth some of it out. But this straw, there we go. I still need to smooth some of it out to fully cover. I just kind of dumped it on there. But this straw is partially broken down, which is okay because it's been sitting out in the weather and it's been wet for many months, but it will continue to break down in place and eventually we'll just keep mulching. So what you can see here is I went ahead and pulled back the first layer of the landscape fabric. So I'm not sure if it shows up well on video, but this right here is my garden bed, and in the center here is my walkway. I will eventually put down more wood chips on this walkway, but look at that garden bed. Like, it's a perfectly clean slate. There is one weed here that was persistent through the landscape fabric, and now it's gone. And look at that, no weeds. It looks great. So I'm going to continue to put down the rest of the straw. I still have a little bit left on that row to do, and then I'm going to put straw on this brand new row that I just uncovered, and I'm going to mulch it heavily first, and then I'm going to plant into the mulch. I'll just scoot some of the mulch away so that the roots of the plant go straight into the soil, and then I'll scoot the mulch back around it. I'm doing it this way because in the past, every time I've planted and said, I'm going to come back and mulch that later, it never happens. And then I end up combating weeds and it just ends up snowballing into this big mess. So this time I'm going to mulch first, teach myself a lesson, mulch first, and then plant into the mulch. That way I won't have the excuse of forgetting and having a big problem later. Ideally, what I would like to do when I'm basically resetting a bed like this is I would like to spread a layer of compost on it first and then mulch it. I do have a compost pile that's going right now, and it's not quite finished. It still has a little bit of heat left on it. So I will use that later. Once the compost is completely broken down, I will use that later to come back and top dress around my plants. But what I do have now is I have a bucket of worm castings that I just harvested from my worm bin. This is my first time harvesting worm castings, so I'm new at that. But what I'm going to do just to increase the fertility of the soil around the plant is when I put my cabbage plants in, I'll just take a small handful of worm castings and put that right next to the plant and down in the hole, so that I have a little boost of fertility right around the roots of the plant. And I'm not spreading it all over the whole stinking garden bed. I'm just concentrating it in the areas right where I need it, just because I only have a limited supply of it. So that is my plan for this time, and hopefully as I keep planting more beds, my compost will be done and I'll be able to just spread a layer of compost like I originally intended. So I'm gonna take a few minutes and finish mulching these 2 beds, and then I'll come back with my plants and my worm casting. All right, I took a little break and came back, and I got the last of the straw on both of the rows, and I got my plants out, so we're gonna get planting now. So this is my bucket of worm castings that I just harvested the other day from my worm bin, and these are all of my cabbages. So I decided I think I'm gonna do this whole row in cabbage here, and whatever I have left I'll bring over to this row, and then I have some Brussels sprouts and a few broccoli plants that I'm gonna put here. So most of the cabbage that I have is a variety called Bravo. I do have a few of this one called Golden Cross. It says it's a fast maturing variety that matures in 40 days, and the Bravo matures in about I think it was 80 to 90 days. So these say to plant 18 inches apart. So I like to use my little, it's a hori-hori or a garden knife. It's exactly 1 foot long, so I kind of use that as a measuring tool to get things 18 inches apart. And then I'm going to take some of my worm castings here and just put a small little handful in around each plant. All right, we're going to put one
Why does the soil
right here.
all stick together like this?
The soil sticks together because the roots hold it together.
Oh, the roots.
Yeah, so get a little, you see I dug you a hole, get a little handful of the worm castings. Do you see the worm castings right there? Good, put a little handful in. Good, that's good food for the soil. And then you put the plant in. Good job. And then you just use your hand to push the soil back around it and tuck it in, like you're tucking it in to go to bed at night. Tuck, tuck, tuck. There you go, you did it. Okay, so I got all of this row planted in cabbage. I was going to start here on this row, but I ran out of time. But we'll come back and finish this up another day. Hi! Are you following me?
I'm riding.
You're riding the four-wheeler? Okay, let's race back home. You ready? Go! Go, let's go! Ah! Keep going! Alrighty, well, I ran out of time. And I didn't get quite as much done as I'd hoped, but that's usually how things go for me. So, but I have to work tomorrow, so this project will wait for another day. But I hope that gave you a better idea of how I basically reset my bed. One of them I just had to get the weeds out and start fresh, and the other one I tarped. I really like tarping. It does take a little bit of time where you can't use your bed. It takes your bed out of commission for a little bit, but it is helpful because it really helps improve the soil condition, because all of those plants that were once growing there, whether they were weeds or plants that you wanted to be there, they die and they basically compost in place. And all it does is build the organic matter in your soil. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I'll see you next time. The dogs.